I know I'm late, but I did not forget Juneteenth. Let's talk about Juneteenth and the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? Okay. September 1st, September-ish, 1862. Lincoln tells the Confederate States, y'all are getting on my nerves. We've been fighting and fighting and fighting, and y'all still have not come back to the Union where I need you to be. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to free your enslaved people if you do not stop fighting and come on back to the Union. By January 1st, 1863, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And the Confederate States said, if you or the enslaved people get caught during battle, we're going to unalive you. I mean, at first we were going to re-enslave the enslaved people, but no, we're going to unalive them and you. And Lincoln said, bet. And January 1st rolls around and he said, I warned you. I did, didn't I? Look what's about to happen. And he frees 3.5 million formerly enslaved people in all of the states that were in rebellion, the Confederate States, that left enslaved people in the border states, which were what? I can do this. Virginia, Kentucky, Delaware, Missouri, West Virginia. I feel like Maryland's in there too, but I'm probably wrong. But the border states still have enslaved people. The Confederate States, sucks to be you, right? He warned you. So, but freedom and enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation came via the Federal Union troops, meaning you got free as the Union troops got to your town. And they were riding on horseback, so it was a slow process. It was, yeah. And guess what the last state was? Texas. Yeah. Texas. Now, let's talk about Texas, okay? Now, during the Civil War, slavery kind of went on like it always did, right? They didn't have any large-scale fighting or significant Union presence, you know. The Confederate blockade had shielded it from much of the fighting and effectively isolated the state. Many enslavers from outside the state moved there because they saw it as a safe haven for slavery, and it helped them in their self-denial. You know, during the Civil War, it helped them pretend that the war wasn't going on. And, well, after the Civil War ended, it helped them in their refusal to acknowledge that, well, one, that they had to give up their enslaved people, and two, that anything bad ever really happened at all. Many enslavers, especially those from Mississippi and Louisiana, took their enslaved people to Texas to hide them from the Union Army. It was called refugeeing. I think I said that right. By the end of the Civil War, tens of thousands of additional enslaved people were added to the more than 180,000 enslaved people already living in Texas. By 1865, there was an estimated 250,000 enslaved people in Texas. Ooh, and then there were the enslavers who lied to their enslaved people and said, war? What war? We won! You're still enslaved. Or the ones who just withheld the information from their enslaved people until after harvest season. Yeah. So while the rest of the Confederate States had enslaved people who were free, celebrating and looking for family and friends, Texas, they were still hard at work, still being sold off at auction, still being whipped. But on June 19th, 1865, 900 days after the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, Union Major General Gordon Granger arrived on the island of Galveston and took command of more than 2,000 federal troops that had recently landed to enforce the emancipation of the newly enslaved people and oversee reconstruction and nullify all laws passed in Texas during the Civil War. And he gives the order. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, the president, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the correction heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. That last part was important because all throughout the war, enslaved black people, when they saw the Union coming, they would drop what they were doing and go to the Union Army. And so the Union Army, wherever they went, would have a contingency of now formerly enslaved black people trailing behind them. That is until they would be able to serve the Union Army. But that's a totally separate conversation. Go and view my video on the Confiscation Acts. It's wild, but I digress. And still, many black people remained enslaved or worse. Some enslavers unalived as many as 2,500 enslaved black people across the state rather than allow them their freedom. Others took enslaved people to Cuba instead of free them, and others just didn't tell them that they were free. Many black people were forced to continue to labor under the oppression of ruthless enslavers and unscrupulous plantation owners. Many black Texans didn't receive the news until 1866. Slave owners resorted to tricks. They delayed, they postponed, they did anything they could to keep enslaved black people enslaved. This was their money, said historian C.R. Gibbs, author of Black, Copper, and Bright, the District of Columbia's Black Civil War Regiment. They wanted to continue to get every last drop of sweat from slavery. In 2020, we all watched as George Floyd lost his life under the knee of a white cop. And people pretended that Black lives mattered. And then corporations and companies and universities treated Juneteenth like a national holiday and gave their employees paid time off. And then the government made Juneteenth, June 17th, a federal holiday, the first one since Martin Luther King Day in 1986. And all it took was the death of 3 black people, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, back to back in 2020. And that's how Juneteenth became a federal holiday.